And I was sitting there and he flashed a bunch of slides. And then there was this one slide that showed up that said, our new scripture is the cosmic evolution story. That one sentence just seared through my brain and my body at that time. I mean, I remember how it affected me. I actually had tears in my eyes because suddenly it felt to me that these things had come together. And it was truly a transformative experience for me. And it was only then that I started to see the deep connection between all of the science that I had been studying for years and years and the uh, the power and the significance of the cosmic story.
Welcome to the Journey of the Universe 10 Years Later podcast. My name is Sam King, and today I'm fortunate to be joined by Sarbmeet Kanwal. Sarbmeet Kanwal is an award-winning educator and a pioneer in novel ways of teaching quantum physics and astronomy. He holds a PhD in theoretical physics from the California Institute of Technology. His aptitude for explaining intricate scientific concepts in everyday language has made him a sought-after speaker among both science and non-science communities. He recently gave a TEDx talk on our new origin story titled Chaos to Cosmos. Sarbmeet is a follower of the Sikh religion and a longtime board member of the Monmouth Center for World Religions and Ethical Thought, where he helped initiate several interfaith projects, including the co-founding of an award-winning youth leadership program called MOSAIC, which stands for Mobilizing Our Students for Action to Build Interfaith Community. In the last two years, Sarbmeet has been assisting in the teaching of courses on the new cosmology offered by the Deeptime Network organization. In August of this year, he will be the sole instructor for a four-week Deeptime course titled Quantum Wisdom, Essential Insights from a Revolutionary Science. Sarbmeet, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Sam. It's an absolute honor and a pleasure for me to be in conversation with you today.
Absolutely. We're so delighted to have you. I thought we would start by drawing on your TEDx talk, where you mentioned the impact of this 1968 Earthrise photo, where we were able to see an image of the Earth from space for the first time. And you talk about how that photo shaped the direction of your life and your pursuit of theoretical physics. Can you talk a little bit more about that sort of origin story for you?
Sure. So I guess let me get started from even a little bit earlier than when I first saw the Earthrise photo. So one of the things that has always been with me, perhaps even as young as when I was 10 years old, is a constant curiosity and a desire to seek. And I guess when I say seek, I mean, find out the truth behind everything. And it is that desire that I feel has been my motivator and my engine that has gotten me to do all the things that I've done in my life. And it was that desire that drove me towards science. It was not so much that I was interested in working out all the mathematics, I mean, which of course you have to do if you're in science, but it was this thought that maybe if I understood the deepest concepts, which we are aware of and know today, that I will be able to understand life itself and be able to answer some of the basic questions in life. It was that motivated me to move towards science, because I felt that that was perhaps at least one way in which I could try to get answers to my questions. So coming back to Earthrise, To me, what Earthrise depicts is a feeling of mystery, a feeling of a connection, an allurement, a feeling of wanting to really get to the bottom of things. So when I saw that picture, it really drew me in. And I think the thing that really captured me was the mystery of having this one beautiful, glowing planet sitting and floating in deep space, perhaps being the most interesting and beautiful element of the solar system. And the desire to find out more, to be attracted by that mystery, I think is what I remember as the thing that most influenced me and got me deeper into where I wanted to go and got me to make a life commitment in terms of learning about physics and hoping that it would answer some of my questions. Let me leave it at that for now.
Absolutely. Thank you. And so inspiring to hear about that early experience as a seeker and the deep inspiration undergirding your scientific work. And I'm also struck by how in your papers and in your presentations, you speak to the ways in which theoretical physics can be understood in the context of story and how metaphors can help make these really difficult ideas of theoretical physics accessible and engaging. And I'm curious what compelled you to make this bridge between your scientific training and the context of story.
Answering that question will take me a little bit more into telling a story of my own here. So, as I mentioned, I was driven to science by wanting to answer basic questions about life. I wanted to know, why are we here? Where do we come from? What are we supposed to do? Why do people do what they do? And how can I make any sense out of it? Those questions have been with me right from the beginning. I don't know where they came from, but it's certainly I would say, a fundamental allurement that I've had. And as I studied science, and I grew up in India, and I was able to get a scholarship after finishing my master's degree there to come to the US to get a PhD in theoretical particle physics. That was my field. And as I studied with some of the best people in the field, and I felt that I got to the point where I kind of had as much of an understanding of the world as some of the best scientists did, it came to me as a bit of a disillusionment. Because I realized that knowing all the things that I knew wasn't necessarily answering the deepest questions that I had. And so I ended up putting science on one side of my consciousness and all of these other, so to say, spiritual kind of questions on the other side of my consciousness. And I kind of settled with the rather uncomfortable feeling that there wasn't really much of a connection between them. And I cared for both. At this time, I certainly was deep into the science. I didn't want to let go of it. But at the same time, I also wanted to cultivate my understanding of these other questions, which led me to read about spirituality, religions, and so forth. And this dichotomy stayed with me for a rather long time. I would say ever since I completed my PhD to perhaps only about 10 years ago. So that was a good part of my life. I essentially lived with this dichotomy in my head. Now that I look back on it, I think much of it was created by the environment in which I learned my physics, which was a science environment. It was a very much of an environment that shunned any kind of a connection with anything other than hard, solid facts, which is what science is based on. And I had unknowingly taken in that training and basically taken it to heart. And so I believed in all of that. So as you asked the question, how did I connect my scientific background with story? Um, it happened, I guess, in some ways in a gradual way, because I was starting to read certain things that were making me start to wonder again if indeed I had made a mistake by putting these things into two separate categories. And I was starting to wonder if there indeed could be a connection that I could make. By then, I had sort of graduated from my career in engineering and telecommunications in the corporate world. And I had actually started to teach some physics again, finally, after a very long time. So I was starting to dwell in these concepts more and more. And it really was a single moment when these two parts of my consciousness suddenly came together. And it was a revealing moment for me, one that I probably can never forget in my life. I I remember I was sitting in the auditorium and I was listening to a speaker that someone had introduced me to. His name was Michael Dowd, and he had written this book called Thank God for Evolution. And I was sitting there and he flashed a bunch of slides, and then there was this one slide that showed up that said, our new scripture is the cosmic evolution story. That one sentence just seared through my brain and my body at that time. I mean, I remember how it affected me. I actually had tears in my eyes because suddenly it felt to me that these things had come together. And it was truly a transformative experience for me. And it was only then that I started to see the deep connection between all of the science that I had been studying for years and years and the uh, the power and the significance of the cosmic story. And it started to show up in my mind as not just science, but much more than that, and something that I could actually dig into and start to learn answers to questions that I'd been asking all my life. So that's my little story here.
I'm curious to hear you speak a little bit more about the intersection between the new cosmology and traditional Eastern cosmologies, drawing from the Sikh tradition. I think I've also heard you speak about Vedic creation stories from the Hindu traditions, and how you see that conjunction.
Yeah, I find that conjunction absolutely amazing, mind-boggling in a sense, because knowing the science, I know how complex some of these ideas are. And then to see that people, at least a couple of thousand years ago, and maybe even more than that in some cases, came up with ideas that have such deep parallelism and connection, has always been a source of deep mystery to me, and also one that motivates me to find more of that wisdom in the science, which I've spent pretty much all my life figuring out. And so just to give you some examples, well, you mentioned my own religion, Sikhism. I'm a Sikh. And my religion is kind of, relatively speaking, new. Some of these traditions that we're talking about, Hinduism, Buddhism, are at least a couple of thousand, maybe even 3,000 years old. My religion actually started about 500 years ago. And it was in many ways a back to basics movement. India has had these old traditions and religions for a very long time. But as you know, as time goes on, religions tend to build more and more of addressing around them, where some of the basic facts seem to get kind of hidden down at the bottom, and then they get surrounded by our own cultural, political, needs that we have, which in some cases translates into corruption as well. So my religion was really a call to people to come back to what the basic fundamental starting points of most religions are, which is the recognition of a single transcendent being that is something that we need to revere and that we need to use as a way to get deeper into our own lives, I would say. And so Sikhism very much represents that. It was the focus of Sikhism is to emphasize the equality of all people and also the equality of all religions, recognizing them as multiple paths to the same end. So the emphasis is on equality, the emphasis is on service, the emphasis is on meditation and using that meditation to essentially lose yourself into that transcendent reality, which is the basic building block of most Eastern philosophies. So coming now a little bit to, and actually Sikhism doesn't necessarily create its own philosophy. It in many ways adopts the philosophy of the existing religions, but puts a little bit of a new sheen on it in order to get people to recognize it. And so to go back to some of the, for example, the Hindu philosophy, it emphasizes the fact that the reality that we perceive around us is merely a vehicle. It's a vehicle to take you to this place, the transcendent place, which is beyond that reality. And so as long as we take the reality for what it is, we tend to be sort of lost in the world. But if we use this reality as a way to transcend where we are and to then go into the depth of where it comes from, then you have a possibility of essentially getting in deep connection with whatever that is that you are transcending to, and through that deep connection, creating a whole new worldview, which is essentially going to serve us much better than the one that we build from, quote unquote, the superficial reality that we see around us. And so bringing it back to the cosmic story, which is the original question that you were asking. So to me, the context of the story is indeed a way to transcend the realities that we every day live in, and to be able to perceive within it this deep dynamic that is creating the cosmos to evolve and to give rise to self-reflexive beings, which is what we are. So the idea with the story is not to stop at the story, because if we did, then it wouldn't be really no different from, quote unquote, doing empirical science. But if you use that story to understand the context that it is building for you, then you have an opportunity to go into it and to use it as a way to essentially create this transcendent feeling inside you, even a transformation, if you allow that to happen. So that's kind of where the connection comes in.
Beautiful. And so much we could draw out about that conjunction between Sikhism and the new cosmology.
Yeah.
I'm curious, given your background in quantum physics, I think quantum physics is one of those fields of science that's very baffling or counterintuitive to so many people. And so how does quantum physics for you evoke this sense of moving beyond our conventional experience of the ordinary, and perhaps bring us into a deeper state of consciousness about this cosmic womb in which we all live our lives.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, absolutely. Quantum mechanics is or quantum physics, I should say, is really baffling in many, many ways. But it is because it's baffling that uh, it has so much power. So you mentioned the idea of metaphors. Um, I believe that metaphors are very important in our lives. In some sense, metaphors is what we use to build our conception of reality. Um, this is why one person's reality can be so different from another person's reality, because we grow up with a set of metaphors, and one person may grow up with one set of metaphors, another person may grow up with a different set of metaphors. Sometimes we call it conditioning, that we get as we grow up. But the metaphors that we use is how we interpret reality. And if you look at our own human story of how we have slowly come to comprehend so much about the world in these last, 2 or 3 thousand years during which science has developed, you will realize the power that metaphors have had. It was this understanding that the earth is spherical or round that allowed us to even consider that we human beings are capable of using our rationality to actually understand how the universe works. Before that realization, we were left with nothing more than coming up with mythical, supernatural, kinds of stories, of creation stories in a way, in order to explain whatever was happening in our environment. But once we understood that there is some finitude to it, that the earth doesn't just go on and on and on to infinity, but in fact it is contained within itself as a sphere, and that there is space around it, it gave us room to completely change our whole perspective on who we are and what we are capable of. Similarly, when we discovered that the earth is just a planet going around a star or the sun, there was another step in our confidence in ourselves of being able to actually study our cosmos, develop science, and use that empirical science to learn more and more about what we have. And in some ways, that may have misled us as well, because the kind of science that was developed in the beginning was very much a reductionist science. It was a science that essentially believed that everything can be understood as a linear causal line of connections between different events, which gives us a very what would I say, objective kind of a view of reality, where we are sitting outside of it and the reality is down there and we are able to understand it. It also gives us a view where someone needs to have created that reality, and the whole idea of a God that lies outside of the universe that created that reality. It also gives us a certain amount of license to then use that reality in whatever way serves our needs, because we are not part of that reality, we are sitting on top of it. And so in some ways, that lineage has created some of the problems that we see today, where we are using our resources in a wanton way without any respect for its true role in our own coming here, where we are right now on Earth. And so the beauty of quantum mechanics, and I had to kind of build this background a little bit to get to what I was trying to say. The beauty of quantum mechanics is that it completely blows apart the idea that the world is causally deterministic, to use a technical term here. And it essentially brings back the idea that the world or the universe is in many ways much more mysterious than what a Newtonian perspective would make you think. In other words, things just don't happen because of causes. Things actually happen because there are possibilities for them to turn into. The lack of determinism, in the sense that you can never be certain as to what will happen, no matter how much information you have. You can still not be sure as to what it would result in. Those kinds of ideas give us a completely new perspective on what science is telling us, and it creates the room inside of science in which mystery can live, uncertainty can live, ambiguity can live, and all of those things are actually essential to the cosmic story, to the ideas of, as Thomas Berry puts it, differentiation, subjectivity, and community. Those ideas can find residence in a quantum reality, but they would be very uncomfortable residents of a Newtonian reality. And it is in that sense that quantum mechanics has given that the room in which we can build the context of the story that we know to be true.
So profound, Sarbmeet. And I'm
Thank
reminded
you.
of, in Brian Swim's Hidden Heart of the Cosmos, he speaks to this all-nourishing abyss, this quantum
Yeah,
field through which particles are popping in and out of existence.
yeah.
And I'm curious how you draw from these insights from physics, such as
Yeah,
the non-determinate nature of particles and waves,
yeah.
and apply these principles to our own lives. So you speak about, for instance, the cosmic principle of allurement, or the bonding
Yes,
between
yes.
oxygen and hydrogen, creating a water molecule,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
the movement to order out of chaos as sort of um,
Mm-hmm.
the homeostatic mechanisms of organisms to seek some kind of order. How do you draw from these insights from physics to try to elicit applications for our own lives?
So I have to be careful in answering the question here, because this is one of those things that I could go on and on about. In fact, this is essentially the course that I plan to teach in August. Quantum Wisdom course is based on that. So there is a lot to unpack here. But I'm going to try to keep this a little concise and just give you a little bit of an idea about where some of this wisdom comes from. Um, so let's take the idea of allurement, which is, I think, in many ways, very, very central to the cosmic story. In fact, I personally believe that allurement is the deepest mystery that lies at the heart of our universe. I mean, that's kind of how I look at it. And I think that allurement is one of those things that essentially weaves through our whole story and carries with it the creative impulse that continues to create new levels of being, I should say. So in some sense, allurement is what evokes new levels of being. And in that sense, I think we can even perceive that as happening now in our own time. It is the allurement that we humans experience. I would say maybe even a field of allurements, because it's not a single allurement, it's really a collection of allurements, and it's different for everybody. It is these fields of allurements that we experience inside of us that is driving another level of being to emerge. And it's in this context, I think, that we can understand our progress towards the Ecozoic era. It is our allurements that, if given the freedom and the understanding and the free reign, it is these allurements that are going to drive, as I've heard you sometimes mention, Sam, the ethics of our environmental movement and so forth, right? The Ecozoic era. So coming back to the connection with quantum physics, quantum physics essentially tells us that the driving force, the engine in all of cosmic evolution is not what we typically think of, which is kind of like a cause creating an effect, and that effect becoming the cause for another effect. That's kind of how we usually think about things, and that's the Newtonian way to think about things. But quantum physics tells us that what is in operation at the heart of everything is the idea of possibilities, which essentially means that there are things that can happen in the future. That's essentially what a possibility is. And that these possibilities, that the previous state of which we are in recognizes these future possibilities and move towards them, not because there is something pushing behind them to go there, but because there's something pulling them to go there. So quantum physics says that the right way to think about how the world works is that there are these possibilities that are beckoning you to move towards them. And it is allurement that decides which of those possibilities will be realized in the future. The stronger the allurement towards a possibility, the higher the chance of that possibility being realized. And this essentially leads to this whole idea of, I don't want to get too technical here, but probability wave functions and all of that stuff that you might hear about in quantum physics essentially is a recognition of the fact that it is future possibilities, future dreams, if you want to call them that, that are making our world move forward and are evolving our world, and the allurements that, that selectively decide where this is going to happen. So I find that as something that you can immediately start to apply to your own lives, because we are allurements. That's what we are. And if we can get to the point where we can transcend some of the materialistic things around us that are often driving us in perhaps wrong directions, if we can transcend them, then we will see what our real allurements are, and we can let them move them to our prosperous future, if you want to call it that. So it's really a letting go. It's a surrendering. It's merging with the flow. It's just letting that wonderful force that has been doing its job for 14 billion years, just let it work through you. That's what's going to create this thing that we are always hoping will happen, right? So that's how I think they're connected together.
So powerfully said, Sarbmeet. And I see, evidence for this idea of allurement in other parts of your work. You founded this youth program called MOSAIC that you mentioned earlier. And I'm curious to hear how you see that quality of allurement as a basis or an inspiration for education, for our work with young people, and evoking the creativity needed to enter what Thomas Berry called the Ecozoic era. And we've had other interviewees who've been very interested in education. I'm curious how you might bridge that insight from quantum physics with your vision for education.
Yeah, and that is a passion that I have. I've always wanted to teach, and I'm very lucky that, after working in the corporate environment, I got the opportunity to go back to this true love that I have. It gives me a feeling of making a difference in some ways, and actually contributing in some ways to what I see as the possibility looming in front of us, the possibility of an Earth community, a possibility of actually helping us come together in the same way that in the past, particles have come together to make atoms, atoms have come together to make molecules, molecules have come together to create life, single-celled bodies have come together to produce the organisms like who we are. And I have this feeling that this is a continuing process, and it's wanting to happen, it's needing to happen amongst us human beings. And in fact, we have seen much of it happen in the way that we have come together into our communities, into our units, into even our religious beliefs, right? The narratives surrounding the religious beliefs are a huge is a huge motivator of community. It brings us together. Unfortunately, though, those same things that have so successfully brought our communities together in our current modern world are becoming dividers. And that is partly because our humanity has gotten to the point now where we don't just live in our own little places, our countries, our cities, but we are becoming a global community, and we are merging together. And when that happens, then there are always going to be a little bit of friction that's going to happen. This is what I call chaos. When I did my TED talk and I said, chaos to cosmos, part of it is this chaos that is happening right now. And we have to embrace that chaos and let it become the cosmos or the order that it needs to become, which is what it has been doing for such a long time. So in my own little ways, I want to try to convert or transform that chaos into cosmos. And the MOSAIC program that you mentioned is my small attempt in my own community to try and do that. So one thing that, I live in New Jersey, and it's a very diverse place with lots of different, ethnicities, with a lot of different religions, in the area that I live in. And I see that there is friction as a result of that, even to sometimes hatred and all of that stuff. And so my little goal and focus with the MOSAIC program is to do what I can to try and build more of that understanding between the diverse parts of our community. So what I've done with MOSAIC, which is now in its 9th year, is that I bring together, and I'm really focused on youth here because I think that they are our hope, they are our future. And so if we start with the youth, there is possibility of higher leverage that they can then pass on that ideas and so on to others in their lives. So what I do is I work with the different places of worship in our communities, and I ask their youth directors to either nominate or encourage some of their students to join this program. So by doing that, I'm able to collect sometimes in the order of about 40 or 50 students every year, representing anywhere from 8 to 10 different faiths. And we bring them together, and we do two things. One is we have them educate each other. So every 2 weeks, we have one set of students invite the rest of the group into their place of worship, and they give them a presentation about their beliefs, about their history, about their holidays, and so forth, and then give them a tour of their place of worship and answer any questions that they have. And we usually follow it with some refreshments and so on. And this happens round robin all the year around until each community has been able to educate all the other communities. And in so doing, these students build bonds and friendships between themselves. Then what we do is we also organize some group charity projects where they all come together and they together do a service like feeding the hungry, all different kinds of things that we've come up with in the past. And that again makes them really come together and to understand that the basics of all of these religions and faiths are really the same. And so the hope is that after they've had about a year of this program, their perspective has changed. They're able to articulate what the differences and the similarities are. They're able to talk to their friends about them and spread that idea around. And hopefully in due time, It will help build bridges between our communities and bring them together. So that's the way in which I've been trying for the last few years to be of service to the community and to myself, because this is what comes to me as my allurement. That's what I want to do. It fits in with my Sikh religion as well, because my religion is all about tolerance. It grew up in this environment of Hindus and Muslims conflicting with each other, and essentially tried to bring them together, two paths to the same goal, was the whole idea. So it fits in very well with my religion as well.
I've been really inspired by the Sikh practice of the langar, or communal meals, and as a way of bringing communities together, feeding the hungry. And I'm just really in awe of the way you're bringing some of these profound, both physical and spiritual insights to bear on these, social issues, and trying to bring people together, make allurement into a more tangible reality. And I wanted to pivot and ask you another question in this spirit of differentiated unity is a term I've heard used, balancing unity and diversity, and thinking about building this kind of a global consciousness, or what Teilhard de Chardin called a noosphere, you sometimes refer to as a interconnected global brain. And I'm curious how you see the James Webb Space Telescope as one example of a way that we are being given this insight into the early universe in a way that provides perhaps some kind of common reference or way of understanding our origins. So could you speak a little bit more about what we're learning from that James Webb Space Telescope?
Yeah, and Sam, you've done a really nice job of bringing this into a full circle here, because we started with Earthrise. And the wonderful thing about Earthrise, I mean, it certainly inspired me, but the wonderful thing about Earthrise is it really brought the world together. And the way that I look at it is that it created a possibility in front of people, which was not as concrete as the photograph made it happen. And so, again, making the connection with quantum physics, the way that action happens in our cosmos is through our allurement to possibilities. So Earthrise created that possibility and made it real for people, and they were allured to it. And in fact, if you look back at history, the decade after 1968 was the decade when all of the major environmental movements in the world started. That's when Earth Day was invented. That's when a whole bunch of chemicals were banned because of their environmental impact. So it really brought us together. Now, sadly, it did not last as much as I would have hoped it would. But these things are important because they bring us together. And in fact, in the end, I would even say that they are the hope that I have of a true Earth community moving towards the Ecozoic era. So coming back to the James Webb Telescope, I see that as the possibility of more Earthrises to happen. And by the way, the predecessor of James Webb, we usually think of it as the Hubble telescope. The photographs that Hubble has sent, and many people have seen them. People make posters out of them. They put them all kinds of places. The kind of beauty that they bring and the kind of allurement that they create, I believe, has been an ongoing process of Earthrise, if you want to call it that. The James Webb Telescope is going to take us to a new level of Earthrise. It's going to allow us to put light on mysteries that have been with us for a very long time. Even though we have a lot of understanding of our universe today, and we understand a lot of the astrophysics and so on, but there are deep mysteries in terms of how the first stars were formed how the first galaxies were created. And the James Webb Telescope promises to actually help us unravel some of those mysteries by being able to take pictures of things that were happening only 100 or 200 million years after the Big Bang. And that's the era when our universe was first beginning to start to create stars. So to be able to open that vista, to be able to bring pictures to the world where you can actually see some things that you've never seen before, I think holds the promise of helping us further to bring us together, to realize some of the wrong directions in which we are going, and to inspire us, I think is the biggest thing, to raise possibilities to which we are allured. And that's where I see is the most power that lies in the James. And just to let you know, the James Webb Telescope is really going very well. It's been in space for almost 5 months now. This was the period that they needed to actually get all the instruments ready to take the pictures. So it's been a long process, but now we're only a few weeks away, I believe, from when all the instruments will be ready to go, and we will be able to take the very first pictures. And it'll take some time before we can process them and make sense out of them. But the time is coming where we will hope to learn, not only maybe solve some of our mysteries, but also learn about some mysteries that we didn't know existed. And this has happened every time we do something new. We solve some old mysteries, and then we find some new mysteries to which we don't have any answers. And I think that's important because the sense of mystery is really one of the most important things that continues to keep us allured and to continue to move us forward in our cosmic story.
I'll be so excited to see those images that come out from the James Webb Telescope. And I really appreciate your idea as somebody, a physicist of your caliber, to say as well that our knowledge is somewhat contingent, or it's continually unfolding. And that's what I think is such a gift about this podcast and the Journey of the Universe project, the idea of cosmogenesis, that our knowledge is ongoing and unfolding. Even in the 10 years since the creation of the Journey of the Universe film, we've learned so much about the nature of cosmic evolution.
And so is our story, right? Our story is unfolding and continuing as well. And part of the mystery is that we don't know where it's headed,
right?
But we know that we are very much part of it. And we also know that our presence and our actions in that story is what is going to make it move forward.
I'm really inspired by the way you're creating space to allow that ecozoic era, that emerging future flourishing to beckon us to emerge. And I see that definitely in your upcoming course of the Deeptime Network that you referenced earlier on quantum physics and the new cosmology. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about what you plan to curate during that course and how that can be sort of an incubator for some of these ideas to come forth.
Oh, okay. So going back to quantum physics, I really see, as I said, I see quantum physics giving to us a set of new metaphors that I think are going to be vital for the possibility that we are all hoping and trying to create in this world of ours. And to me, as I mentioned before, metaphors are very important. And the metaphors that we had before have kind of become spent now in some sense. They're not being as useful to us in some ways as they have been in the past. So it's amazing that science is continually refreshing itself and reinventing itself. And that is what quantum physics means to me, is a reinvention of our science, looking at everything that we already know to be true in a different light, and with a set of new metaphors that are much more meaningful in terms of what the cosmos needs from us going forward. So the metaphors that I mentioned before about being allured by possibility, instead of thinking in terms of a linear causal connection with everything, I think is a transformative metaphor. It not only allows us to see the reality in a different way, but it actually allows us to look at our institutions in a different way as well. You know, we all know that we've got some serious problems, some systemic problems in the world today. You know, the systemic racism, the divisions that we have, the issues with the wrongful use of our resources and so forth. And as long as we try to attack those things in a Newtonian way, basically, which I mean by that is we look at, you know, what is causing this, so let me remove this cause, or what's causing that, and let me remove that cause, or let me stop this from happening, or let me stop that from happening. If we approach it in that reductionist way, I don't think that we are going to succeed. We have to use these new metaphors that I'm talking about, where we present earth rises to people. You know, we present them with possibilities that are so alluring that they cannot resist but move towards them. And the cosmic story is a vehicle for that, right? That's what its real value lies, is to inspire people to understand the reason why they're here, kind of thing. And so these new metaphors can help us to not just address root causes and, you know, this and that, but actually to create in front of people more and more of these earth rises that would allure them to want to protect our environment, to create something beautiful, to do something different. That's one side of quantum physics that I hope to bring through my courses. But there's also the other side that talks more in terms of the allurements, right? The allurements that have constantly arisen are also a result of quantum physics. It's the complexity that resides inside quantum physics that is able to convert basic allurements into more complex allurements, into what we call it love. Love is an allurement, and it is nothing more than a complexification of the allurements that started the universe going, just as the real objects that we see around ourselves in terms of, you know, mountains, planets, human beings, they are complexifications of the material parts of the universe. So once we recognize that allurement is something that is deep inside of us, that is actually a thread that goes through the story, and if we recognize that and we see it as something arising inside of us and moving us to action, that metaphor again is in my view a very powerful metaphor. And you know, in one of my writings, I think I said that you have to become your allurement to the point where it starts to overflow from you. And when it starts to overflow from you, it starts to impact other people. And it is that impact of other people that essentially creates, you know, what sometimes in deep time language we consider interbeing. Interbeing is a result of our allurements flowing into each other because they're arising inside of us and flooding our bodies, and we're becoming those allurements. So, you know, I don't want to go on and on here, but that is some of the things that I hope that my course will bring out.
I wrote down this passage that I think you're referencing, which I'm happy to read as we wrap up
Sure.
here.
Sure.
You wrote that becoming aware of our allurements is to find an entrance into the cosmic flow. Expressing them in our lives is to merge into that flow. True allurements are not passing interests or transient hobbies. They take residence in our flesh and blood and become an expression of who we are. our beings are subsumed by those allurements until we become an overflowing vessel and start to awaken the allurements of others that touch our lives. And
Yeah.
I was just so captivated by that passage, Sarbmeet. And
Thank you.
as we conclude here, we have listeners from all over, ideally around the Earth community. Do you have any parting wisdom that you would like to share as we try to draw forth the insights that you're bringing to us today?
I think what I would like folks to think more about is the place of mystery in our universe and in our lives and in our world. I think what has happened to humanity in a way is that because we have learned so much, because we have gained so much knowledge, because we have invented such amazing technology, we have become arrogant. We have this idea that we kind of know it, and if we don't know it, we can always go to Google and find out what we don't know. So it's as if, we live in this well-defined world where all is understood, and that is as far from the truth as you can imagine. We have always lived in a world of mystery. Certainly our ancestors recognized that, and that is why they were allured in the way that they were. But it's still true today. We live in a world of mystery. All you need to do is take a peek at, some of the mysteries inside quantum physics to understand that we are deeply, deeply embedded in mystery. And I think if we start to recognize that, and if we start to not just recognize it, but to live inside of it, I think that everything will change. And there's a quote that comes to mind from a Hindu sage. His name is Osho. And he said this one statement that has stuck with me forever and ever. And he said, life is not a problem to be solved. It is a mystery to be lived. And that, I think, is an attitude that if more of us adopted and felt comfortable with, I think this world will change. Thank you.
Sarbmeet, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today, for all the inspiring work you're continuing to do, for being this overflowing vessel for folks like me and for people all over who are going to listen and benefit from your work. So thank you so much for joining today. And I'm wishing you all the best to you, your family, and to all of your future endeavors.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my ideas. Thank you.
Thank you.